It is the show that shakes the Southland, Clemson Sports Talk. We got Mac coming up here on the program in just a few minutes. He left us a phone call. You can too, 803-450-0086. Mac, man, it's good to hear from you. I will say, he told me don't sugarcoat it. I really don't. Maybe I have been, man. Maybe I have been. I thought it was two very good teams. Tiger Chuck says, well, there's no doubt that facing Georgia is the toughest test we're going to have, but I'm sorry, you can't give up 7 or 8 sacks because you're facing an elite defensive line. Whenever we are Clemson football, he said, we are Clemson football, for crying out loud. We should have an elite offensive line at this point, but ... Now, there is a fair take in there for sure, and that is the concerns about Clemson's offensive front. I don't tend to feel like, listening to Dabo Swinney's evaluation of the game and the way some things played out, though, that all 8 of those, because I do trust what Swinney says about whether it was a wrong route that got run and that threw DJ off. There were a couple of scenarios. I thought there were at least 2 where DJ held the ball too long. I mean, you don't have all day. Like, you do not have all day. Some of those, maybe 2, maybe 3 of those sacks were on DJ. Now, there were a couple. The first one really felt like that one was on Jordan McFadden. I mean, he just got bull rushed on Clemson's first possession on that third down deep in their own territory. And, I don't have all 7, 8 of them right in front of me, but, when you listen to this coaching staff, they don't harp on all of these things being on the offensive line like the fans tend to do. And that comes down to the fact that they know a little bit more about what plays were supposed to be run, what the route trees were supposed to look like, what checks were called, how a guy, missed a man or whatever, just allow the guy to come free. They kind of understand that. Now, look, is that acceptable? No. Certainly not. It's a lot easier to accept if you win, though, right? And so those deficiencies, again, can be glossed over by W's. And Clemson Tiger fans, guess what? You've had a lot of W's as of late. And so that certainly helps ease your mind a little bit when it comes down to, well, what do we have to get better at? But then when you've run into, elite level competition, again, out of the gates against Georgia, their defense is certainly one of the most dominant defenses in the country. And I would beg the question, even if you believe that every sack was on Clemson's offensive line, and I don't, but even if you did, how many other teams in America do you believe, and this is a legit question you need to ask yourself. This is not Swanny sugarcoating. This is me giving you an honest question. How many other teams in the country do you think are good enough to rack up those types of numbers against Clemson? Right? Because there has to be a margin of difference. There has to be a difference between how good you believe Clemson's offensive line is and how good the team they're taking on is. And whatever that difference is, if it's 8, if you just want to say, well, when they're playing Georgia, it was 8 sacks, Swanny, I'll say, all right, well, pick the next group, pick the next team, whoever. It doesn't have to be the next one on the docket. It doesn't have to be SC State. Pick the next team, put them up there. Comparatively speaking, what's the sack differential in that group? Is it 4? Is it half? How many teams would you have out there that you would say, well, it's probably greater than 8? Probably very few, right? And so then you start to think about, well, if you clean these certain other things up that weren't on the offensive line, that differential gets smaller and smaller. That number gets smaller and smaller so that when you are playing later on in the season, instead of being in a game against a top-flight team when you give up 8, you've cleaned up some of your miscues and maybe only give up 3 or 4. See, the season is not won nor lost in that opener. there's a lot to be learned from that opener. And that, I think, is what I've kind of taken away and continued to listen and, hear what the coaching staff has had to say. Now, should the offensive line be better? Should Clemson be bringing in better offensive linemen at this point, given the run of success that they've had? Should Clemson offensive linemen be littering NFL locker rooms the way Alabama's offensive line has been in recent years? Yeah, I would like to think so. I would like to believe that is the case. But it just hasn't been. And they've had some guys here and there, John Simpson, Jackson Carman. But even Mitch Hyatt was an undrafted free agent, and he was one of the top prospects in the country coming out of high school. So there hadn't been a ton. And that is a fair, valid point to bring up. If you want to compare apples to apples, you want to say, look at what Alabama does in terms of their offensive line and the players that get to the next level, then yes, I agree. Clemson's got to figure out how to get players to come in on that offensive line who want to do what Nick Saban talked about. He was talking about Leatherwood and somebody a year ago. I can't remember who, doesn't matter. But he was saying, these two players, both of them were drafted in, let's say, the first round or the first 15 picks of the NFL draft. They went head-to-head at practice every day. Take us back to the opening segment. 15 days of the year, if you're fortunate, you get to play a game of football. That's 3 weeks of practice. And those two individuals at Alabama, Leatherwood and the other guy, whoever it was, went head-to-head every day at practice. What's more valuable? And that's what I think you have to sell if you're Clemson. You, as an interior offensive lineman, get to go up at practice against